Yeah, let me just introduce
Okay.
you. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming to this webinar. We're aware that you have other things to sort out, like pointless homework for this fall and the upcoming SAT, which hopefully won't get canceled. Anyways, let me introduce Professor Joe Price, who is Professor of Economics at Brigham Young University, a faculty research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, a research fellow at the Institute of Labor Economics, a research fellow at the Sutherland Institute, a senior fellow at the Austin Institute, a fellow of the Wheatley Institution, a co-editor of the Economics of Education Review, and the director of the Brigham Young University Record Linking. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Price.
Great, thanks. Okay, let me just share my screen here really quick. Hey, you guys see that okay? Joel, can you see everything? Does it look, are you seeing my slides okay?
Yep.
Perfect, okay. Well, I'm excited to talk to you, and let me just tell you what my goal would be. I think you guys, are kind of the future of economics, and so I could just ask the question, what do I hope economics looks like in the future? And this is exactly the kind of group I hope it looks like. I'm very excited to be talking to you because economics is really exciting, and I think one of the things that's going to make economics even more exciting in the future is as we borrow things from other fields, as we borrow things from data science, as we borrow things from computer science, as we borrow things from sociology and political science. I think one of the neat things about economics is the ability for it to integrate the best that other fields have to offer and combine them together. So what I'm going to be showing you today is some of the ways that I've tried to combine machine learning and family history to do economic research. And so a lot of people are like, I don't see how machine learning and family history and economics go together. So I'll just show you how I've been able to make it work. And hopefully what you can see is that there's some pretty powerful tools coming out of machine learning that might make it possible for you to do the kind of projects that you're interested in. And let me make one thing. Let me just let me go. Okay, sorry, let me just, so if at any point, if you have a question, just raise your hand, because I'm totally fine answering questions along the way. And just to let you know what level I think you to be at, this is the same talk I gave at Yale University to the professors in the economic history group there. So that's, you guys are kind of on par in my mind with that type of person, because I think that's kind of what your future looks like. So, but again, what that means is if I start to talk in a too technical way, just stop me and I'll try to do better. So here are 4 tools I'm going to tell you about. One is record linking. Record linking is just when you see a person in a record, trying to find that person in another record. Sparse data linking is the same thing, but in a case where you don't have a lot of information about the person. So record linking would be really easy if you had social security numbers. Okay, so any records that have social security numbers, super easy to link. You just merge, super easy. In historical data, we don't tend to have social security numbers. What we have is maybe a birth year, a birthplace, a name, a race, a gender, and we're going to match on those characteristics. With sparse data linking, the only thing we might have is just your name. So you might ask the question like, is that even possible to link when you only have a name? And I'll show you that in some cases it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about line segmenting. And that's just when you have an image, just trying to figure out where the information is. So let's take a simple example. Imagine you have a high school yearbook and you wanted to extract the names of people in that yearbook. Then line segmenting is basically just figuring out where the names are, saying these things are pictures, these things are names, I'm going to grab the names. And then finally, handwriting recognition. A lot of the records we work with were handwritten. And so we want to be able to read those and teach a machine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use these tools to examine the long-run impact of prejudice using a shock to anti-German prejudice that occurred in World War I. And the impetus for this project was actually thinking about 9/11. So 9/11 created an exogenous shock to anti-Arab bias in the United States. Okay. And so the same thing happened in World War I. The nice thing about going back in time is that it's not quite as emotional. I bet none of you really think today about anti-German bias. Like it's just so far in the past that it's not emotional anymore. But it's similar. And so we can maybe take some of the emotions out of it and try to study it like a scientist would and say, actually, what did happen to children whose parents were German when World War I hit? And suddenly everyone hated the Germans. and persecuted them, what were the long-run consequences if you were a child in that situation? This is the lab I run. I run a lab at BYU, about 50 students in my lab. We do three things. We do computer vision. Computer vision is just taking data out of an image. Natural language processing is just taking that data and turning it into usable fields. And then record linking is just taking that person in that particular image and linking them to other records for that person. And our goal really is to convert any historical record into linkable data. So if you were to go to the New York City Library, I bet you would find some pretty amazing books in there. And it'd be pretty awesome if we could just scan those books, extract the information from those books, make that information linkable to other things. So let me show you just three projects you could do with these kind of tools. Okay, here's one about using data from Harvard. We actually went to Harvard's library and we gathered information about every student that went to Harvard between, say, 1880 and 1930. And we were able to find out that in the early 1900s, they randomly assigned your roommate and the people that you would live near in the dorms. So you have this nice random assignment. And we asked this question, are there benefits of having a roommate that is from a richer family? Are there disadvantages of having a roommate who's poor? And so right now we're studying these effects of basically the people that you live near in college and how that affects your long-run outcomes. And so this is this image you see here on the left is an anniversary report. Basically, the alumni of Harvard get to kind of brag about themselves 25 years after graduating. And the nice thing about the bragging is they give us tons of information. They tell us where they live, when they were born, where they were born, who their parents were, who they married, if they had any siblings that went to Harvard, what their occupation is. And so this rich information here allows us to link people in Harvard back in time to their parents and then forward in time to their future family. So this allows us to say, did these students come from a rich home? Did they come from a poor home? Did they come from a rich neighborhood, a poor neighborhood? And then we can say, if we follow them into the future, are they doing well economically? Okay, so any questions about, let's test the hand raising thing, just make sure I'm seeing it the right way. Does anyone have any questions about this Harvard project?
It's just a random question, but how would the privacy work here?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Well, the neat thing is these are students who went to Harvard in 1910, 1920. So they actually were born over 110 years ago. And so in the United States, we tend to have privacy laws that have some expiration date. So for these records are actually public. You can access them in a library. And then the census records that we're linking to them are also public. So in the United States, you have to wait 72 years to see a census record. So the 1940 census is currently available, and we use that. We also use 1930, 1920, 1910. And then really exciting is that 1950 census is going to become available here in just another year or two. But yeah, you're right, privacy issues. So when you're trying to link modern records, you're going to be bound by privacy issues. One of the reasons I like working with historical data is that the privacy issues are less of a concern. The other neat thing we're doing with this data is that during this time, there was a lot of basically anti-Jewish affirmative action. They'd have rules that said you cannot let more than 5% of the students in be Jewish. And it actually looks exactly like what's happening to Asian Americans today. And so again, what you can do is take a situation from the past, see what happened because of that policy, what were the negative consequences of that policy, and say what are the consequences going to be today if we do the same thing. Here's another project. This is about interracial couples. I've just been really intrigued by interracial couples, and you can see here is our former president, who was the child of an interracial couple. I find diversity to be so interesting, what I would love to be able to do is compare the outcomes of children that are part of a racially diverse couple, and think about what are some of the challenges of being a child of mixed race couples, and what are some of the advantages. We believe that there's large advantages to diversity, and so we would like to study this. Now, one of the challenges is historically this wasn't a very common living arrangement, but because we have data on every single person that lived in the United States, we can actually focus in on very, very small groups and study them. And so right now we're hand linking children of interracial couples from the 1920 census, the 1910 census, the 1900 census. And this is also going to provide us some really interesting insight into how people think about their race over time, because we can take the child of a mixed race couple and say, well, what race do they report in 1920? What race do they report in 1930 and 1940? And so there's a lot of interest in passing or other ways that people kind of, their identity evolves over time. And then here's just one other project, is the one I mentioned about anti-German prejudice. The hard thing about World War I is that it happened and presumably affected the whole country. So what you have is basically like one experiment. You could say like, okay, let's look at the United States before World War I and after World War I. That's a really weak identification strategy. Like you have to rely on there being nothing else that changed between 1917 and 1920. So what you'd really like is some spatial variation. So what I'm saying is World War I created temporal variation over time in the amount of prejudice against Germans. What you'd also like to say is, well, were there some towns where it was particularly acute? Like, I don't know a lot about New York City during this time. I don't know, like, I know that at the time, New York City actually got rid of all the German operas. Basically, you could not perform a German opera. They also did crazy things like changing the names of things to not use German words. So, you know, like the word sauerkraut, they would call it Liberty cabbage. You know, like little things like that. These are kind of forms of discrimination. Well, what we realized is actually what would cause someone to really hate the Germans? And it'd be if someone you knew died in the war. Like, I think that would be a hard thing for me. Like, if my best friend was killed by the Germans, I don't know, I'd probably have a hard time. Like, in my heart, I'd be like, I'd still love people, but that would be hard for me. And so that's the variation we want to exploit. So what we did is we gathered data on the 116,000 US soldiers who died in the war, and we linked them back to their hometown. And then we took all the hometowns in the United States, and we just said some of these hometowns lost soldiers, some did not. And so that's where we get our exogenous variation. Okay. And so what that allows us to do is test, are the consequences of prejudice larger for kids in towns where they lost US soldiers? So let me pause for a second. Any questions about that project or the one right before it? Questions at all? Okay. Yeah, and feel free to stop me at any time, because this prejudice project is neat because we can actually follow everyone in the country. There was 2.5 million German Americans living in the United States in 1910, and tons of people stopped being German. When I told you about our identities changing over time, in 1910 we had 2.5 million people that said they were born in Germany. In 1920 we only had 1.5 million people willing to admit they were born in Germany. And so that's an interesting case where one of the ways you avoid prejudice is by changing who you are. And so we actually at the time we were more German as a country than, or even today we're more German than we are British, but because of the 2 world wars, we've kind of like gotten rid of that part of our history. So here's what it would take to do this study. So first of all, we need to identify each soldier who died in World War I. There's about 116,000. We need to figure out what hometown they were from. Okay. Then we need to identify for each child whether their parents were German, and then identify, and then it'd be really interesting, we're curious if the soldier themselves left behind a widow, because we think that would be particularly salient. Okay, so these are I just wanted to just show these as examples of projects you could do, and now what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about some machine learning tools that you could probably use for any other situations. Let me show you those really quick. So these are those 4 tools I mentioned: record linking, sparse data linking, line segmenting, handwriting recognition. Okay, so here's our goal. There was 217 million people that lived in the United States between 1850 and 1940. We'd like to link them all together into one big data set. So every single one of those people that live in the United States would be part of this data set, and we'd be able to follow them over time. And we'd also be able to see who their parents were, who their siblings were, who they married, if they have any children. We'd like to link them to their vital records so we know how long they lived. We'd like to link them to their school records so we know if they went to college and where. We'd like to link them to their draft cards so we know how much they weighed and how tall they were, and other kind of physical characteristics. So that's kind of the dream, is to link all this data together. And here's some things you could do with it. You could study the long-run effect of some shock or public policy. So for example, like one study I saw recently was about the impact of libraries. So Carnegie funded a whole bunch of libraries all throughout the country, and you might ask the question, do libraries help people? Like, do libraries promote education? And so this ability to follow kids over a long period of time makes that possible. You might just be curious about migration or mobility or the boundaries of markets. Like, I don't know for you guys, you might ask the question, Like, let's take the group of you. There's, 29 of you. Think about in the future, you might be married to someone. How far away from you right now is that person that in the future you'll be married to? Okay, do you think it's 5 miles, 10 miles, 100 miles, 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles? So that might tell you something about the boundaries that are put around who you interact with, who you marry, where you work, where you go to school. And so historically, we can actually follow people over time and say, like, what were the boundaries? Like, would somebody take a job that was more than 10 miles away from where they grew up? Would they take a job 1,000 miles away? And so I think you guys are so used to living in a very mobile economy. But even today, like a lot of your high school teachers actually probably grew up pretty close to where they're teaching school today. We can also exploit information about your kin network. I think sometimes we talk about, so President Obama was raised by a single mother. And so you might say, well, he was raised by a single mother, he must have been disadvantaged. But I think like just having a single parent is one proxy for disadvantage. But if your grandparents are doing really well, or if you've got aunts and uncles and you've got cousins and other people helping you, I think the kin network is going to be a better proxy for what you have available to you as family resources. We can also assign treatment based on where you were born and where you live over time. And then we can combine, covariates from lots of different public data sources. And I think one of you asked about privacy. So that's one of the main reasons I like these historical data is I can share this data with you. Like if one of you, when you get to college and you're like, I want to do a paper on X, I can give you this data. I can say, yeah, here, use the data. So it's much easier to access than say other modern data sets. Yes.
Are there cases where like the census can be manipulated or like inaccurate?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Do you have some examples that come to mind? Because there's definitely this happens. Were you thinking of a particular type of bias?
Not exactly. It's just because like in history class, we were talking about this group. I forgot their name. I think it was Daughters of. They were like a group that like I was just like thinking about propaganda.
Sure.
And how like people like manipulate like certain evidence or data to like especially in slavery, how like people might like lie about how often like slaves feel. I don't know, it's like propaganda in general.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so that's an interesting case because sometimes there's things about ourselves that we're embarrassed about. Now, luckily, the census asks questions that are pretty innocuous, like, how old are you? What's your gender? What's your race? But, what country you're born in could have been a sensitive thing. So if you were born in Germany and you were living in the United States in 1920, you might actually not want to be totally truthful about that. The other thing is a lot of former slaves didn't have birth certificates. So if you were to ask a former slave, how old are you? They might not know. We see a lot of rounding. They would say, well, I'm about 40 years old. But what's interesting is they didn't always round the same direction. So in the next census, you ask them how old are they? They might say, well, I'm about 40 years old, which means that in one census, you think they were born maybe in 1880, and in the other census, you think they were born in 1830 or 1900. And so, yes, you're right, that what you see in the census record is not always a correct depiction of the individual. One thing we had to deal with recently is that the census enumerator often used very offensive terms for people. So instead of using the person's name, they would use the N-word or something like it. And so that's obviously not the person's name. And so we're going to have to be careful about linking those people because what's in the census was not correct. The other thing that will often happen is the data we work with was transcribed by a human. So think about the different steps. A human told the enumerator something about themselves. So I say to you, what's your name? And you say, my name is Nashida, or how do you say your name? Did I say it right or wrong?
Yeah, you said it right.
Okay, so imagine you say to me, Nashida. Now I'd have to think about how would I spell that. Now I can see how it's spelled because I can see it on the screen. But imagine I'm a census enumerator and I just write it down the way I think it is. Now we go 70 years into the future and someone's now reading my handwriting and they have to translate what they think I wrote. And so your name could actually, might change a little bit. So those would be cases. I think in the case of propaganda, I don't know, definitely your birthplace might be a sensitive thing. Your race is probably sensitive. So in places where there was a lot of anti-Black bias, sometimes people who could pass for white would sometimes say they were white. That might be one example. Now, these are some of the ways that people have linked records in the past. So there are methods that are just fully automated. And what that means is you just come up with a set of rules, and then the links happen if they follow those rules. So you might say like, hey, if the first name's the same, the last name's the same, the birthplace is the same, and the age is within 3 years, we'll just call it a match as long as there's only one match. And then if there's more than one match, you just won't call any of them a match. Okay. You can also do use statistical models that create match scores. Okay, again, using those kind of similarities, but trying to like statistically figure out what the matches are. Or you can use machine learning. And what machine learning is just teaching a machine how to make a decision. So the machine might look at the first two names and say, oh, these are pretty similar, so I'm going to give it this score. Okay, the last names are pretty similar, I'll give it this score. The birth years are pretty close, I'll give it this score. It'll combine those scores and then it'll make a decision. And the neat thing about machine learning is if you give it enough examples, which we call training data, then it actually gets pretty good at the task over time. I mean, one of the biggest changes you're going to see during your lifetime is the amount of tasks that were historically done by humans that are going to be replaced by machines. Okay, I don't know, this is probably a crazy prediction, but my guess is that when you guys have kids or maybe grandkids, they're going to think it was crazy that we let 17-year-olds drive cars. They're going to be like, I cannot believe you let 17-year-olds drive cars. That is like so dangerous. And in fact, they're probably not going to let any humans drive cars because actually humans, we're really bad at it. Like I've crashed a car. Almost all my siblings have crashed a car. My son's crashed his car. I think in the future, we're going to realize that actually once the machines kind of learn how to drive a car, they're going to do a pretty good job at it. So that's the other neat thing about machine learning is once the machine learns how to do something, it doesn't tend to forget. Okay, so, but here's the thing about machine learning is you have to have training data. And so where do you get that training data? So what I'm going to propose is that the other powerful tool that you're going to want to be able to capture in the future. So I definitely, like, I'd encourage all of you to acquire data science skills. What that means is you should figure out how to have a programming language, maybe Python, okay? And then you're going to want to know how to use data in a way that informs decisions. Now the question is where to get that training data. Well, the neat thing about training data is that humans are making decisions all the time. So like if I wanted to create training data for teaching a car how to drive, I might actually want to go identify who are the very best drivers and then have the machine measure everything about the way they drive and then try to mimic what those best drivers do. Now in the case of linking records, the neat thing is there's like millions of people that do genealogy for fun, like as a hobby. I don't know, does anyone in this group have a family member that does genealogy for fun, like as a hobby? Just chime in if you have a relative that does that. Does anyone have this type of person in their family? Okay, well maybe you'll be that person, okay? So it was my uncle, but the neat thing about these people is they spend a lot of time carefully researching and making decisions, okay? So what we do is we get our training data from a genealogical website, it's called familysearch.com, and we use this to identify millions of true matches, and we use this to create a large high quality training set that teaches the machine how to make these matches. And so if you've never used Family Search before, it's a free website. It's got about 12.6 million users, gets about 500,000 visits every day. There's about 1.2 billion profiles. And so what people do, this is my tree right here that you're seeing on the screen. So you can see my dad, my mom, my grandparents. And so what you would do is you would start building your tree, adding in what you know. And what you would know would probably come by just talking to your parents and saying, Mom, when were you born? Dad, when were you born? When were your parents born? And you kind of keep adding stuff back. And then what will happen is as you move back, this is my co-author Casey Buckles, as you move back, you'll start to see what countries they were born in, and you might be able to find records for them. You might hit some dead ends. So you can see some of these have dead ends. And you know, all of what people do when they're doing genealogy is trying to expand and find more information about their family. So what I'm saying is millions of people do this as a hobby. We can look at the decisions they make, and we can use it to teach a machine how to do the same thing. Okay, so if you want to try out Family Tree, this is kind of what it looks like. It's got people attach sources, census records, and so we can actually then take this case where this person's name was M. Letty Caswell in one census. She was Letty Gaddy in another census. We can teach the machine how to match people like that. Okay. Now, if you want to get even more detailed in, this is what the actual census looks like. This was a handwritten document on a big sheet of paper, and you can see that right there, right in this section. If you see that Caswell in there, right below there is the M. Letty. What this means is we actually, just from 1900 to 1920, we have about 40 million matched pairs, and that's what we use to teach the machine how to do machine learning. Okay, so let me pause for a second and take any questions. Just feel free to chime in with any questions about how we're using machine learning in this situation.
I have a follow-up question. So,
Sure,
as
yeah.
you said that, for example, driving, like
Yeah.
self-driving, so wouldn't allowing the machine to drive would risk because it will be easier to hack or like manipulate the machine rather than our own mind if human was driving?
Oh, so let me understand. So you're saying that somehow humans have a better ability to manipulate the car than a machine would?
No, for example, if someone is trying to murder someone,
Oh, sure.
so it will allow, if it was a self-driven car,
Yep.
it would be easier to like mess up something in the car, maybe the function, and it will like the murder won't be like happen by them, and there won't be any evidence either,
Oh, I see. Interesting.
rather than a real person driving, because you will actually have to do much more to manipulate their brain to do such accident.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about the situation of using cars to murder people. I mean, I'm probably more worried about the millions of people who die just because we get sleepy or we don't pay attention. But you're right. You'd probably have to have some other way of protecting people from other things. But I guess what I love is I love to think about a world in which some of the decisions that we routinely make, we could maybe outsource to a machine learning program. I don't know. I love to run. It'd be really neat if I had a machine learning program that gave me advice on how fast I should run so that I don't run too fast, I don't run too slow, maybe tells me when to stop, maybe tells me how long to rest. I mean, there's things like this right now, but those things aren't really built on about me. So that's the thing I love most about machine learning is its ability to personalize stuff. And I think what the personalization is going to look like in the context of family history is, imagine I asked you and I said, tell me a little bit about your grandma. And you just told me, like in words, you just started telling me about your grandma. Imagine I could like pull up photos of your grandma and her birth certificate and her transcript from high school and her, like her wedding photo. And I mean, that stuff exists about your grandma. That's the neatest thing about the world is there's so much detail about people in the world. It's spread out. It's sitting in some closet. It's sitting in some desk. It's sitting in some filing cabinet. And I think one of the exciting things about these tools is we're going to unlock all that data and make it linkable and discoverable. Okay, so this is just kind of, I'll kind of skip through some of these. These are just some interesting, this is kind of the process we use to link records, but I wanted to show you one that's kind of cool. Well, first of all, one thing that's interesting is Connecticut spelled 97 different ways in the census. So machines are really bad at knowing like, well, what is, like, are all these things the same? So you have to kind of teach the machine a little bit. The machines also doesn't know, like if you look at these two names, I bet most of you can tell that John Smith and John Smith are kind of the same, they're just spelled differently. So we can actually teach a machine how to think about what are all the variations of John, okay? Because John and June, like those are pretty similar, they sound the same, but they're totally different. Like June's a girl's name, John's a boy's name. So like the machine wouldn't learn that. So what we do is we actually create a vector, or we create a network of all the names that we observe in the data, and the machine starts to learn, you know, how does it tell if names are similar? And it gets good at creating both communities. And a community would just be a bunch of names that are all the same, that represent the same. And it could also catch things that are, you know, nicknames. So it would discover that Joe and Joseph are really the same person. Or one that's harder is Mary and Polly are actually the same person. Polly is a nickname for Mary in historical records. Okay, so this is kind of fun thing that you can then use networks to say things about names. Okay, I'm gonna skip a couple things here. There's also like different machine learning methods you can use. We use XGBoost, but you can use a neural net, random forest, a logic regression. Just think of these as like tools. And what we're trying to do here is just evaluate those tools in terms of, you know, how accurate are they, how efficient are they, what's the processing time.
So, like the only benefit, are there like any other benefits to these machines besides supplying large amounts of data?
Let me think about, well, sometimes they can discover patterns that might be harder for us to know as humans. So if I were to say, like here'd be one application to say medicine, if I'm a doctor, I might have only seen a certain number of patients during my lifetime. The machine might have actually seen about 100,000 more patients than I have. So I think that, so here's the two advantages I'd say with machine. The machine can work a lot harder and faster than I can. So it can do a lot more, like what you said, it could actually link a lot more records than a human could. The other thing is the machine can look at more information than a human could. because humans, we have limited attention. We can only kind of like focus on certain details, whereas a machine can look at everything. So I think those would probably be two areas where machines have some advantages. Okay. And so let me just kind of, so then basically this is just the results from a recent paper we wrote where we're trying to link everyone from 1900 to 1910, from 1910 to 1920. And using a variety of methods, we were able to link about 62 to 65% of the US population from one census to another. This means that we can have a data set with 50 million people from 1910 to 1920. So if you were to say, well, what's the effects of prejudice? Well, we have a sample now of 50 million people that we can observe in 1910 before World War I and 1920 after World War I. And we could say, well, what happened to these people? Did what happened differ between Germans and non-Germans? Did it differ between people that lived in a town that had someone die versus a town that didn't have someone die? Okay, this is just a way of, let me just talk about this briefly. This is just a way of thinking about how well you did. And there's two measures. One on the bottom here is recall, and that's just how many of the possible matches did you find? And then precision is that it says when you find a match, did you find the right match? So let's imagine we have like a RoboCop that was like a machine learning that was out there just trying to catch criminals. So recall would be like, of all the crimes that occur, how many did our RoboCop catch? And then precision would be, is that when our cop catches someone, did he actually catch someone that committed a crime? So you could actually then start to think about where you would want to be on the precision recall frontier. Like, imagine we could catch more criminals, but we had to do it by catching more people that weren't criminals and throwing them in jail. So you might say, well, how do you feel about a low precision in the criminal justice system? And you might say, actually, I think it's probably better to like not incarcerate innocent people, even if it means we don't catch as many criminals. So all you're saying is that you might want to be on a different part of this trade-off between precision and recall. And this is going to happen in lots of other settings. For example, like with cancer detection, like, would you rather miss a cancer that's a true cancer, or would you rather tell someone that they have cancer when they don't? Okay, so you're going to have this trade-off again between catching cancer and then scaring people. And so you're going to have to kind of think about that trade-off. Okay, so let me show you now the way we try to involve humans in this work. So what I told you is now we have a machine that does this work, and then I'd love to have a human help me verify. So what you see on the screen here, this is a way that humans can help verify. So on the left is just a map. So if you went to this website, you could type in your surname, and then it would show you all of the people with your surname that you could help do this as a project. And then the picture on the right is what you would actually see. So in this picture on the right, you have a family on the left and a family on the right, and you have to decide if they're the same family. So I don't know, you guys look at this information really quick. Tell me if you think that this is the same family, and I'll just randomly call on someone. So make a decision. I'm scared to randomly call on someone. I'd hate to put you on the spot. So feel free, look at this record. So on the left side is a record. On the right side is a family. And we want to know, does this record belong to this family? So who wants to help me out here? What would the decision be that you would make? Joel, I'm going to put you on the spot. You got to make the call. Okay, because my machine, my machine made a decision, and I want you to tell me what you think, and then we're going to compare what you think with what the machine thought.
I'm going to say it's the same.
Okay, what makes you think that?
Their birth dates are pretty much like very close, and they were born in the same region, which is Tennessee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then they have like family members that are similar, like Richard B. Price and Mary. So I definitely agree with Joel on this. So the machine thought this was a match. Joel thinks it's a match. I think it's a match. Maybe you disagree, but this is a case where the human could say, I think this is a match. And then the human would hit this little paper clip and attach it. And then the machine would forever know that Mary Elder is the same as this Mary Elder, and that becomes training data. So this becomes a really neat cycle, because what you want to do is you want AI to speak to humans, and you want humans to speak to AI. So how do you let a human and an AI interact with each other? We need to have a platform, and you need to have a feedback loop. Okay, and so what we're saying is that Family Search is a genealogical platform that creates this kind of feedback loop. Okay, So let me just I'll take about like 7 more minutes, though feel free to ask any questions. I'm just gonna show you a couple more things that are kind of fun. So here is a high school, this is actually a college yearbook. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out, you know, University of Virginia, what do we know about the people that go to the University of Virginia? So this is actually from college yearbook, but you could do it for other places as well. And so notice that in the college yearbook, we don't know a lot about the person. All we have is a name. So George Wayne Anderson Jr., and he's from Richford, Virginia. Now the junior is helpful, right? Because now we know the name of his father, so that might help us find him in a census record. Got Louis Astor from Newport News, Virginia. Here in a high school yearbook, all we have is just you know, a name, Dennis Chase. In the records we were using for soldiers that died, all we have is a name and a hometown. And so in each of these cases, we would love to link these college yearbooks to other records, like a census record. And sometimes that's easy to do because maybe there might be only one George Wayne Anderson living in Richmond, Virginia, but sometimes there's multiple people. And so what we're doing is developing methods that help link people in this case. So what that means is sometimes even if you want to link from, say, record A to record B, you might actually want to go A to C to D to B, okay? So maybe you want to go from high school yearbook to census. Maybe you go high school yearbook to school record to medical record to census. And so that's something we've been doing with these kind of projects. And actually the family tree on Family Search, the profiles actually make this easy because there's oftentimes multiple records, and those can help you know that you got the right person. Okay, the last thing I just want to show you is just an exciting thing about extracting images from records. Now, really quick, does anyone have parents that grew up in a different country? I'm just curious. Yeah, no, yeah, where were your parents from?
My parents were from Bangladesh.
From where?
I grew up there, Bangladesh.
Oh, Bangladesh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone that had parents or grandparents from another country?
My parents were from Turkey.
Turkey, oh, amazing. Actually, we'll talk about Turkey here in just a second. Any other countries? We got Bangladesh, Turkey. Okay, well, I don't know a lot about Bangladesh, but let me tell you about Turkey. The country Turkey used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire actually took a census on a pretty regular basis. They actually wrote down the names of everyone living in the country and information about them. And there's actually a group of academics right now that are extracting that data using handwriting recognition so people can discover their ancestors from Turkey. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Turkey also, at the end of World War I, Turkey and Greece actually did a refugee swap.
Population exchange.
They did a population exchange. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if that affected your family, but basically there was a group of people that were kicked out of Turkey to go to Greece and people that were kicked out of Greece to go to Turkey. So they basically like swapped refugees. And we actually have data on all of the people coming from Turkey to Greece as part of that population exchange.
And then like my dad is from the Black Sea region, and that region was predominantly Greek, but some of them are converted to Muslim.
Okay.
So some of them like had already converted to Muslims, like Islam, I mean. And then, so his family was one of those, I guess, but like with the republic being formed, like some villages had Greek names, but their names were later changed to like Turkish names.
Oh,
and the same thing in Greek.
Okay, yeah.
In Greece, yeah.
Yes,
so like kind of a loss of history, but I don't know if that affects census data.
Well, the neat thing, so you use the word loss of history. The neat thing is sometimes that history wasn't lost. It's just not available at the moment because it's sitting in some obscure record that we've never thought to turn into digital data. So like if you were to go on Google and like Google, you know, Turkish census data, you might not actually get access to that data, but in the future you will, because there's groups right now that are trying to turn those pieces of paper into images and then from images into text. So let me just show you kind of how we do this. And this will just be kind of the last thing I share, and then we can close with any final comments or questions you have. But here's a record that I'm trying to do. This is a census record. This is what a census record looks like in the United States. We're also doing census records from Mexico. We're doing census records from the Czech Republic. We're doing death records from South Africa. I don't know a lot about Bangladesh, but maybe I can learn. And we've also wanted to do Philippines. I just got a project for Okinawa, as part of Japan. But the thing I love about this is there's information in these records that people would love to know about their family. One of the things I liked about the census is it tells you what occupation your grandpa did or your grandma. It also tells you how much money they made. You'll be a little surprised that many of your grandparents, my grandparents didn't make hardly any money. I think like the annual income was like $1,000 or $500 or something. And so these are things that can help you learn about where you're from. And so to extract this, we actually have to do a couple things. So here's the first thing we have to do. So here's one of our projects. The thing I put in red, that's a cause of death. We actually are trying to find everyone that died in the 1918 pandemic from the flu or pneumonia. And so we have to teach the machine where that little box is. And we have to grab that box and then try to read the handwriting. Sometimes you don't have to read the handwriting. Sometimes you just have to figure out where the words are. This is actually every physician in the United States. So again, if you could teach a machine how to read this, you would know where your grandpa or grandma went to medical school, where they practiced being a doctor and other things. Okay. So here's the first step that we do. You have to deskew the image. Deskewing the image just means get those lines to go straight. So if you look at those lines, they kind of look straight, but they're tilted just a little bit. So there's actually some mathematical formulas you can use to kind of deskew the image, get it to straighten out. And then sometimes the image gets warped a little bit, and so you can dewarp the image. So all you're trying to do is just get the image to be as straight as possible to start with. Okay, then what you do is use pixel intensity to figure out where the lines are. So all this blue line is doing is just summing pixels. It just goes across the row and sums the pixels. And so those little peaks are telling you where the lines are. Okay, so you figure out where the lines are. Okay, so you can figure out what the lines are. Then you figure out where the columns are as well. And so then you can basically split the image into little chunks, little pieces. Okay, the second thing you can do, and then you just try to read those little names. Okay, now to let humans help us out, what we've done is created a little app where we'll show you a whole bunch of examples of your surname, and you just have to click the ones that don't belong. Okay. And then we're also creating a VR version of this, where instead of clicking, you shoot, or you shoot arrows at things, or some other way of gamifying the experience. Okay, but the key thing is we can again, use this process by which a machine does something, it shows it to a human, the humans makes decisions, and the machine gets to see those decisions. Okay. So I think the last few slides were just about one specific paper, but I think I'm going to stop there just because, or let me give you the bigger point that I want to make. Like, you might not care about family history, you might not care about helping people find their grandparents or great-grandparents. I hope you do though. Like, I hope, or what I can tell you is, I think if you discovered things about your grandparents, you'd have a renewed appreciation for what your life is like, and you'd actually be more resilient when bad things happen to you. Okay? There's something about knowing about where we're from that makes it easier to face the future, because the future is very uncertain, but the past is very uncertain too. So if we can learn from the past, then we can go into the future with a lot more resiliency. The other thing I hope you got from this is that economists do a wide variety of things. Economists are really good at working with data, and we've been very clever at getting data from lots of sources where people wouldn't have thought to look. And so what I'm trying to show is that machine learning is one of those places where we're going to get data in the future and allow us to study questions that maybe we couldn't have studied before. Okay, so I think I'll stop there, but I'll answer something. I'm going to stop my share, and I'll just kind of open up if anyone has any questions.
So I brought up propaganda before, but I don't think I was clear about what I was trying to say. I think when I meant propaganda, I meant like, has there ever been like cases where people would falsify like the census and the numbers in the census as well? So like, how do you avoid that, and how do you like represent everyone in the census?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Here's a one kind of episode I know about this. Some towns wanted to be bigger than they really were because they wanted more people to move there. They didn't want to be like the town with only 200 people. So there are towns that made up people so that the city would be bigger. Sometimes they also just double counted people. So if you go to Everett, Washington in the 1900 census, it looks like everyone's in the census twice. So basically Everett made itself twice as big just by doing 2 rounds through the town. There was other towns accused of this. I think St. Louis was accused of this. But yeah, that could be one. I'm trying to think of other, I guess you could, like in the modern setting, I don't know. Yeah, I can see your point. Yeah, maybe, I mean, the nice thing is once we've linked everyone together, I think we're going to be able to do a better job at telling who's a fake person or where this kind of inappropriate activities might have occurred. Yeah, that's a good question.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have two questions. One is when you're giving humans things to check, like when you're checking the computer, how do you ensure that when they send it in, it's going to be correct and they're not saying
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of people are like, well, how do you know you can trust the human to make the right choice? So we let 3 humans make the choice. And then if they all agree, then we call it good. If they disagree, then we give it a little more careful look. Yeah. So that's kind of, so yeah, I would never want just like to rely on one human, because humans make mistakes all the time. But, you know, hopefully the mistakes are different that humans make. So if 3 people all agree, then hopefully that's like a pretty, now if you were really concerned, you might have 5 humans look at it. And if you think about like really important medical decisions, we'll often ask for 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th opinions. That's all we're kind of doing here.
It reminds me a little bit of like CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA when you go into the, like when you're signing up for something, they might ask you to like tell like which pictures have like stoplights or something.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually a brilliant innovation that Google developed, which is they basically outsourced a lot of their machine learning training by forcing people to do it as part of a CAPTCHA. Yeah. So.
Another question I had was just more generally about machine learning, because so much of it is just like finding what data you can use. So how do you kind of go about in this project, like finding the websites that you do use now as training data for things?
Yeah, mine was kind of in reverse, which is I love family history. I actually do family history probably 10 to 20 hours a week. I love helping people find their family. I volunteer to help people all the time to find their family. It's like probably my favorite thing in my life. So I was doing that for fun already using Family Search. And then I said, is there any way I can combine my hobby with my job? And what I discovered is that people in economics were using machine learning to do the same thing I was doing by hand. And so for me, I started with the hand linking and then I moved into machine learning. But I could see it going the other way. Maybe if you had a machine learning problem, you might want to think about who's the group out there that's trying to do this by hand, and try to, like, so if I was trying to do machine learning in medicine, I might actually want to go like watch doctors and see how they make decisions and see if I could create a machine that would mimic what a good doctor does.
So I have a question about a specific article I read. I think it was The Great Inversion and the Future of American City by Alan Ehrenheld, who studies urban cities. And in the article, he says that census can be not reliable when it comes to population. So what are some reasons and what are some downfalls for that?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, we should always be, here, just let me close the door real quick. I mean, we should always be, I mean, one of the things I like about being an economist is that we always ask the question, where did the data come from? And did the people who created the data have incentives to maybe not be fully truthful? And so I think that that ability to discern when data is reliable is really important. So if you were worried about the population of cities, I mean, one thing we've been trying to do is try to figure out how do you know, like when a city changes its name, how do you follow cities over time when cities are changing their names, changing their boundaries, combining together? So like Fruitland used to be a city and then it became part of Oakland. And so the machine's not going to know that. And so I think, but this is also why I think what you want to do is take a good machine and combine it with a smart human, because that's really where the most power is going to come. The machine by itself actually is just going to like try to process the data. A smart human combined with that machine is going to do some pretty amazing things. But a smart human's also going to catch the biases that you're worried about, which is that maybe the humans that gathered the data were lying, and that's quite possible.
I have a question. What about illegal immigrants? Like, how do they play into the role of like accuracy and representation in the census?
I mean, I think that's a real worry we have today about whether we're capturing everyone, because we want the data that we use for our economic analysis to reflect the true population. I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I'm glad you asked that question because it makes me now think, like, when else in our country's history have we had illegal immigrants? And do they show up in the census? Now, the neat thing is that even if an illegal immigrant does not show up in a census record, they might show up in another record. Because so imagine I'm an illegal immigrant, and so I don't fill out my census form. I might still have a child, and so I might go to a hospital and have a baby, and that baby might get a birth certificate. So even though I wasn't in the census, I might show up in some other record. So that's the neat thing about using multiple records is I could maybe say, oh, that's interesting. Here I have a birth certificate for someone that wasn't in the census. Why is that? And so even in modern data today, we find that lots of people that we see in birth records aren't showing up in censuses. Now that might have been that they were missed, or it might have been that they didn't want to get, didn't want to be included. So yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because actually it makes me want to go back in time and say, when did we have, like when were we cracking down on illegal immigration in ways that might have caused people to try to avoid getting into the census? Yeah, that's a really good question.
Do you think doing your job like here in the United States is particularly interesting? Because like it always took an influx of immigrants like in the 1800s, like from different countries in Europe and like, or like China, like in the West Coast. Like, do you think that's interesting since like there can be many matches?
Oh yes, I mean, well,
One nationality, like.
Well, yeah, I guess what you're asking is, I think the United States is a really interesting country to study. And I think ultimately what we want to know is we want to know what is the secret sauce. The United States rose to be, the most important economic country in the entire world. Like our GDP is just like the degree to which our country has grown economically over time is unprecedented. It's actually kind of like this miracle story. And wouldn't it be neat if the secret sauce was immigrants? Like if we could actually know that, wouldn't that be neat to know the degree to which immigrants contribute to long-run economic growth? In which case, then it might inform the way we handle our immigrant policy today. And
Yeah,
so,
because they were like kicked out, like from most countries because of political reasons. Like when Germany unified, it was like really conservative. So a lot of like smart people were kicked out, academics, and they came here. That was like a net plus.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting. I mean, it's interesting to actually think about like the people in our country that have allowed us to grow so much, and ask the question, like, what's their immigrant story? Like, when did they first come to the United States? And what would have happened if we had not let that person come to our country? So yeah, I mean, that's the thing I love about the past, is we can learn about things we've done. I mean, that's why hopefully you guys have all seen Hamilton, but I mean, I think there's like some things in that movie that just really capture that. I think the line I love best is like, immigrants, we get things done. It's like there's just this like ethos that actually like, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier. I think there's like value in diversity. Like we bring together the best of everything in the world. And so I do worry about a world in which we cut ourselves off from the very best, in which like maybe there's someone that we turned away today that would have made our country so much better in the future. Like, I don't know. So that's what I guess what I'd say is what I love about economics is economists tend to be very practical in saying, okay, here, let's define a goal. Goal is long run economic growth, stable growth over long periods of time. What allows that to happen? So that's kind of cool. Well, Joel, I have to jump off for another call here in a couple minutes, but I don't know if you guys have any final questions, but I've enjoyed talking to you. I mean, here's the biggest thing is I hope when you guys get to college, you do economics. I started out as an engineer in college, and I was just sitting in an econ class, and it just captured my heart. I loved it. And because I realized that in engineering, I wanted to fix things. I wanted to like create things that worked well and like solve problems. And one of the things I love about economics is about creating systems and policies that fix things and that make things work well. And the moment I realized that I could use the engineering way of thinking and bring it to helping people, like economics is just like awesome. So I hope you give it a shot when you get to college. Though, given that you're in an econ club, I hope that's a better chance than like the typical high school student.
Thank you so much, Professor Price, for coming to speak to us today. I know I learned a lot. I definitely found your talk really interesting and inspiring, and definitely, speaking for myself and a lot of people here, economics is definitely a large interest for all of us going into college. So yeah, thank you so much.
Great.
And thank you to all our members who came. Please be on the lookout for a newsletter coming into your inboxes very soon with some important information. And be sure to check out our publication, The Junior Economist, which was just published on our website with some really great articles written by fellow members. So be sure to check it out.
Cool. Thanks. Nice to see you guys.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.